normal circumstances, we would have had a nice reception after this debate, but unfortunately, it's not possible for several reasons. And on the other hand, because of the pandemic, we are able to have great speakers who are far away from Belarus. And before we start, several organizational remarks. Our event will take around an hour. During the first half, I think, yes, 20-25 minutes, I will ask our speakers several questions. Then we'll open this session to Q&A. If you would like to ask a question, please write it in Q&A box or raise your electronic hand. Then if you need translation, please change your soundtrack. Калі вам патрэбны пераклад, то калі ласка націсніце справа знізу на глобус і перайдзіце на рускамоўную дорожку. Калі у вас ёсць нейкія пытанні, то напішыце іх у чаце, і вам дапаможа наш чалавек. Then let me remind you that this event is live streamed. On Zoom, we have a limited group of webinar participants, but people are watching us also on Facebook, on YouTube, ВКонтакте, Twitter, and even Одноклассники. If you are watching out there, feel free to type your questions under the video, and my colleagues will send these questions to me. Finally, let me introduce our guest. Melinda Haring is the Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and a Senior Fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Melinda has worked for Eurasia Foundation, Freedom House, and the National Democratic Institute. Also, she is a co-author of the recent Atlantic Council report, which is titled Biden and Belarus, a strategy for the new administration, which we, of course, will discuss today. So, Melinda, thanks a lot for joining us today. And let's start with your report. Could you please share the main ideas from it with us?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm usually the moderator, so I don't know what to do today. I don't know how to be the expert. And I am a great admirer of your think tank and of Ryhor's analysis. I think you're very lucky, and he's the best person out there to understand the situation. So it's really an honor to share the platform with you tonight. I regret that it's Friday night at 7 p.m. And I hope you have a beer or a glass of wine in hand. This should be fun. And feel free to stop me if I get too into the weeds, or if you know everything I'm saying, tell Ryhor to tell me stop, and we'll make it more conversational. So we did indeed just write this new paper, and I'll ask Ryhor's colleagues to drop it into the chat. It's unfortunately just in English right now, but it's called Biden and Belarus, a strategy for the new administration. And we wrote this paper for the National Security Council, for the White House, for the State Department, for Congress, to tell them what's going on in Belarus. Unfortunately, there's not very much expertise on Belarus in Washington, D.C. So part of what we did was and last year, a lot of things happened in Belarus. Last year was a crazy year, obviously with COVID and with all the political changes in Belarus. We wanted to bring the US government, collect basically all the top line judgments and put it in one piece and do some thinking about what the West could do to help in the situation there. So that's what this report is. I don't think you're going to be surprised by a lot of it. A lot of it is going to sound like, why is this woman from Washington telling me what I already know? But I think that it's important for us to chat and to talk about what's happening in Washington now. And I have good news on that front. So let me start by acknowledging I wrote this paper with 4 gentlemen who know different areas, and I think that's why this is a pretty good paper. I wrote it with Sandy Vershba, who's the former U.S. ambassador to Russia and the Deputy Secretary General of NATO, Ambassador John Herbst, former ambassador to Ukraine, and Andres Oslin, the leading expert in Washington on post-Soviet economies. So that's our team, and I'm representing all of us here today. So let me run through the top line judgments. We wrote this paper because we think that there's a historic opportunity for Belarus. There's a historic opportunity for Joe Biden to bring Europe together, to bring everyone together and to reverse the tide of dictatorship in Belarus. Last year was obviously a big surprise with COVID, but also with what happened in Minsk. No one expected Lukashenko to face a real competitor for the first time. Lukashenko is likely finished, but he's hanging on. It's really hard to figure out how he would regain legitimacy at this point. Russia wants something very different than what the West does. Russia would love to have someone who's much more pliable, someone who's much easier to work with. Lukashenko is a big pain. Everyone knows that. He's a difficult partner. Russia would like to have someone who will keep Minsk in Russia's pro-Russian orientation. We know that it considers Minsk to be part of its sphere of interests. US interests are completely different. We want to see an independent Belarus. We want to see a Belarus that can make its own decisions, period. If the democratic movement wins, bingo, you get that outcome. You have an independent Belarus. But the Kremlin may overreact. And this is really, I think, the heart of the paper. This is the most difficult problem when you think about what Biden can do in Belarus. So how can he encourage and strengthen the opposition without sparking a Kremlin crackdown? That's really the hard thing. We have three answers to that question, and they're a package. They have to go together. All three of them, you can't do one and not do two or three. So here's our package. Tikhanovskaya has been good at saying this democratic movement is about Belarus. This is not about NATO. This is not about the EU. This is about our politics and the way we want to live. President Biden, when he talks to her, needs to say, keep saying that. That's really important. This is about Belarus. Number two, Biden needs to talk to Moscow, and he needs to say the same thing. This is about Belarus's domestic politics, not geopolitics. We want an end to the repression. We want political prisoners to be released. We want a real dialogue, and we want elections, and we're going to watch them. They are going to be internationally supervised. And then number three, this is the good part. The Biden administration needs to say to Moscow, if you send security forces to prop up Lukashenko or crack down on Belarusian protesters, you're going to hear from us, and it's going to be really bad. And they need to be willing to throw all sorts of icky sanctions that Moscow is going to resist. Me and my co-authors did not get into specifics. I think it's better to leave it as an open-ended threat. But those are the three recommendations we came up with to try to figure out how to encourage the democratic opposition without overstating, without provoking a Kremlin reaction. Excuse me. We also looked at the domestic situation over the last year. I think four things stick out. Like I said, it was an unexpected year, but no one expected Lukashenko to be so vulnerable. He obviously, people are sick of him. He botched the response. He didn't do well with the response to COVID. He is a patriarch and doesn't think women have any value, and that completely blew up in his face. And then he reacted with too much violence. Another point we noted was the amazing way that the democratic movement has set up infrastructure in Lithuania, Poland, Latvia, and Kiev. A third point that we noted, and this is one thing I'm worrying about, is that $10 million has been raised on platforms online to help the democratic movement. That money may run out. We know it's really cold in Minsk right now. We know that people are not going to come out in big numbers, probably for another month. There are really boring and bureaucratic reasons for why the West can't send more money. And that's when there's movement, and I'll talk about this in a minute, to send more funds, but there's limitations on how to do it. COVID makes it more difficult as well, since people can't come and go as freely. We know the security services are watching bank accounts as well. Cyber currencies are the way to do it. And then the fourth factor that I think that's worth mentioning are changing attitudes towards Russia. We know that a number of Belarusians no longer favor a strong alliance with Russia. We know that there's greater use of the Belarusian language. We know that there's white and red flags everywhere. There's great symbols. There's a rebirth of national identity. That's an exciting point to watch, and I hope that your think tank will definitely do more research on it. So another section of our paper focuses on Moscow. This is not going to be a piece of cake for Moscow to get what it wants, right? They're not going to be able to snap their fingers and get the outcome they want. I think it's safe to say that Moscow and Minsk have a complicated but complex relationship. Moscow wants Minsk to stay in its orbit. It's paranoid. Moscow is very paranoid, and it fears that what happens in Minsk will not stay in Minsk. Vladimir Putin does not like it that the white and red flag is in Khabarovsk. That scares the pants off of him, right? We know that Putin has tried to push Lukashenko to leave. He offered him a $1.5 billion loan. Kommersant says that Lukashenko just asked for another $3 billion. I haven't seen that confirmed, but that's the rumor. Moscow also helpfully sent journalists to Minsk to help, and he promised to send troops. But there's a big but there. If he does send troops at some point, there may be overreach, and that will likely spark anti-Russian sentiment in Minsk. So he has to be careful. He can't do anything he wants. And Minsk, I don't have to tell you this, Belarus has fundamentally changed in the last year, in the last 7 or 8 months. We also looked at the economic relationship between Russia and Belarus. Belarus has 2 problems. One is it has a cash flow problem. It doesn't have enough money right now. And the economy stinks. The economy hasn't grown since 2012. So that means that Belarus is likely going to be, we say, shaking the tin, asking Moscow for money. And it looks like Russian oligarchs are trying to take over 4 of the biggest and most valuable companies. So now the interesting part, the most interesting part, what do we do? If we understand the situation, what do we do? There's 3 categories of ways that the West can help. One is assistance, and it's not just money. The second category is sanctions. And my team recommends personal sanctions for people who violate human rights, sanctions on Lukashenko's money men, and then sanctions on Russian companies and businessmen who take over Belarusian companies at the behest of the Kremlin. And then number 3, which I think is really important, is our voice. What can the US do? What can President Biden do to make the situation in Belarus more well-known and to get some action? So I'd love to talk more about our recommendations or any direction you want to go in, Ryhor. It's your choice.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. As a significant part of your paper is dedicated to Russia, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about one specific aspect. In Belarus, among at least some people, there is a hope that actually Russia and the West can somehow find a common ground and will not see Belarusian political crisis as a competition, but a room for cooperation. Do you think it's realistic that Russia and the West will find common ground to help Belarusians to start political reform in the country?
No, I don't think that Moscow and Washington have the same interests in Belarus. And I think it's a fantasy to say that they do. The US wants Belarus to become an independent country that makes its own decisions. Moscow is never, it's the same problem that we have with Ukraine. Moscow is never going to let Belarus go, and it's never going to let Ukraine go. And that's the fundamental conflict. Are there ways that the United States and Russia can work together on other issues? Yes, of course. But there's a fundamental conflict. I don't see avenues of cooperation in Belarus. That being said, the hand of Washington and the hand of Moscow is both limited for the reasons that I said.
And just before we move to the Q&A session, let me ask one more question about what's going to happen. I and probably some of participants share your ideas, your recommendations, but at the same time, many of us think that actually the West is very reluctant to engage in Belarusian political crisis. And do you think that it's realistic that Biden's administration will be more involved in Belarusian political crisis than the US and the West in general were involved over the last 6 months?
That's a great question. And I don't want to promise you things that make us all feel good. I want to be realistic about what I think will happen. Under Trump, there's a lot of things you could say about Trump. Belarus had a really, really strong advocate at the State Department. Deputy Secretary Steve Biegun loved Belarus. He spoke to Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. He encouraged her in Lithuania. They had a really good relationship, and he cared a lot about Belarus. However, the U.S. didn't speak out enough. The U.S. slapped on some sanctions. It wasn't enough. So things have changed. We have a new president. We have a U.S. ambassador to Belarus for the first time since 2008. and she's fabulous. She knows what's going on. She understands the situation. She has already been in Vilnius and met with Tikhanovskaya's team. She's getting ready to move out to Minsk. So I'm encouraged by that. I have to tell you, though, it's a mistake to just focus on the new Biden team. It's still slow. It's still early days, right? He just became president. A lot of the top jobs that will determine policy, I'm not trying to be evasive here, but a lot of the top jobs that will determine the policy are still open. We have a Secretary of State, right? We have Blinken. We know who the second person, the number 2, is going to be, Wendy Sherman. She is not a Belarus person. She's not an Eastern Europe expert. She's going to be very, very concerned about Iran, about climate change, about these bigger issues, these transnational issues. So don't expect her attention. Number 3, though, will be concerned about Biden. That's Toria Nuland, who is super involved with Ukraine and Russia. She knows the players. She's outspoken. She's going to be great. One problem, though, that I'm worried about bureaucratically at the State Department is that the Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and Eurasia is still empty. We don't know who that person's going to be, and that's going to be a key job. So that's one thing to watch. Let me give you some optimism, though. Capitol Hill really, really, really cares about Belarus. So Capitol Hill, I know this is going to be shocking, but our Congress is super, super slow and really can't, super slow. That's the nicest way I could say it. But last year before Christmas, they passed the Belarus Democracy Act, and it was passed with really, really quick speed. And it was, everyone supported it. It's clear support for Belarus. What that act does is it will increase the assistance levels next year. And also Congress has asked the Biden administration to surge the funding now. So that's something to watch as well. I want to say, though, there's one other caution. This is not an immediate caution, but caution for year 2, caution for year 3. China is the big priority for the Biden administration. I'm a Ukraine expert, and I would love for Biden to focus on Ukraine and Belarus. I would, and he has a personal tie to these regions. He cares about these places. When he was vice president, he went to Ukraine 6 times. He cares about Georgia. This matters to him. He cares about the heartbeat of freedom, but he has to worry about China. And he's just said at the Munich Security Conference that China is going to be the priority. Fortunately, Russia's in one of the priorities, but it's going to be a lesser priority. I hate to sound like a bureaucrat, but the priorities determine time and money. So if he's saying China, 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 we have to figure out a creative way to get his attention. This is my creative way to get his attention. Okay, hold with me for 1 second. So China's going to be a priority. Here's the argument that I'm going to use the administration for why they should care about Ukraine and why they should care about Belarus. To win the war against new authoritarians, here I mean China, we need as many democracies as possible. We can't do it alone. This is gonna take a bunch of people. The most outspoken are new democracies like the Czech Republic. Ukraine and Belarus would be important players in a coalition of the free world against authoritarians. That's the argument. Maybe that's too high-minded, Ryhor, but that's the best argument that I can make. If the priority is China, we need allies, and Belarus can be an ally, and Ukraine can be an ally if we get it right.
Yeah. All right, thanks a lot. Now I'd like to open up to questions to invite the audience to join the discussion. We already have many questions on Zoom, YouTube, and Facebook. So please type your questions or raise your hands. Let me start from the question from Zosia Lutkevich, which sounds like, could you talk a bit more about the interplay between the situations in Russia and Belarus, especially how has Navalny's arrest impacted Putin's room for maneuver and his plans for Belarus?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure that the Kremlin knows what to do with Navalny. I mean, Navalny, seems to have a lot of attention. His name recognition has gone up. I think that Lukashenko and Putin are sort of in a similar position. I think Lukashenko doesn't know what to do and doesn't know the way out. And Russia has a lot of negative factors. Putin has a lot of negative factors that he's dealing with as well. His economy is not going well. He has problems in Belarus. Ukraine is a problem. He has unrest in Khabarovsk. So I don't think that it's a piece of cake or a picnic. I think that there's learning that's going back and forth, that the Russian opposition movement is watching what's happening in Minsk and vice versa. I know that some of the strategies are being copied and people are drawing inspiration from each other as well. I mean, the bottom line though is if Ukraine and or Belarus succeed, right? If these places become vibrant democracies, Putinism is done. Putin doesn't have an excuse anymore for why his country can't be democratic and embrace a rule of law society. That's the other argument I think that matters for U.S. interests. These faraway places that are very difficult and troublesome could mean the end to Putinism.
Thanks a lot. Now let's go to the Artem's question. Huge thanks for the presentation and wise recommendations. Artem would like to play a devil's advocate here. So,
good. Go ahead.
Let's presume that protests will continue and Tikhanovskaya led movement is able to regain momentum. But does Washington need to have a plan B in case these hopes will not materialize? If yes, what should it be? Because as of today, it is far from obvious that we will see another wave of powerful protests in the coming months. According to Artem, I should mention that, yeah.
I think Artem is right. I'm worried, honestly, I'm worried that the protest movement, when it comes back out in a month, is not going to be able to show the kinds of strength that it did in the fall. We know that the numbers have declined. Yes, Washington should have a plan B. We should be thinking not just in the short term, but in the long term. And I think the long-term plan, and where I would put a lot of money if I were on Capitol Hill or at the State Department, is in media. I think RFERL, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Belarusian service has done a phenomenal job. And I would be doubling that service, if not tripling that service, and making a long-term commitment to free media. Ryhor, we were talking about this before. The Belarus has fundamentally changed. It may not change this spring. You may not get rid of Lukashenko this year. I don't know how quickly it's going to happen. But the bottom line, though, is that Belarusians have woken up. Civil society has exploded. People are contributing to their society in new ways, and you can't go back. You can't go back once people have made that transition. So it's only a matter of time. It may take it may take 2 or 3, 5, 10 years, but the U.S. needs to make a long-term commitment.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not just sure, but Andrei, has you raised your hand? Could you please type because I saw it once, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, Andrei did raise his hand.
Yes. Yep. Here you go.
Hello to all. I still don't understand what kind of language is working.
Yeah, you should.
So how can I turn off the translator? Yes. I first of all, thank you for the presentation, Melinda, and it's interesting. But I must say, I think this year actually, and partly last year, was kind of farewell with illusions, 2 illusions among Belarusians. And I know few important. One illusion, it was internal one. I've heard it for many years from many people who saying it's enough, just 500,000 people on the street, and Lukashenko will step down, and say some sorry and goodbye to Belarusians. So we've seen many times by that number, and it's clear that it's not enough. And that's a big illusion, I think, that people lose last year. And it's good because actually that I would say today, Belarusian society is way more ready for change than it was in August, and way more clever and way more prepared for change. So it's a difficult, I would say, even hard way we go, but that definitely is much better and we feel much stronger as society. At the same time, of course, we have this repression. My friend from Slovakia, he said that if that kind of repression where repressions against people were when Czechoslovakia and the Gavel was running, they would never had democracy. So Belarusians express its will to live in democratic and freedom state. But that's another illusion that I think many of Belarusians are losing right now. I remember for many years, many officials from Western countries told us, if it will be clear that people want to live and in democratic and free country, we will always support them. We will always give our hand. Yes, we shouldn't push Belarusians. We shouldn't, tell people what kind of life they should choose. But once it will be clear from the society, we will support. And I think it's kind of a good approach, but impossible to realize. And that's the kind of illusion people are losing now in Belarus, that yes, I think Belarusian society, as clear as it's possible, that we definitely we don't want to live in an authoritarian regime. We want to be European country, not from the point of belong to European Union, but from the point of values. That's clear. But what we see from the Western countries today, it's a reaction that actually almost the same we have seen 10 years ago after the square, which was way more less, from the number of participants, and that's clear that we understand that how limited are possibilities of United States and European Union in Belarus. And to be honest, I personally don't believe in any sanctions, because I think it doesn't work like this. Personal sanctions, they are possible, because they actually, it's less about money, it's more about status and about possibilities. But economic sanctions, in current situation, that's actually not something that will helpful to our revolution, I would say, to our changes, definitely. Because we have Russia, because we have quite strong regime, from their power side, they're ready to beat people. So my point here is next. I think Western countries should more focus not just on how to punish Lukashenko because he's staying in power, than to focus on how to support people here and now with their struggle. And when I mean struggle, I don't mean just civil society. I mean small and medium business. So everything that makes people more self-confident within the Belarus and ready to act and ready to continue. Because what we see now from the Belarusian government side, they try to cut off all those possibilities. They don't care about economic side. You said that it's problem for Belarusian president. He should borrow money from Putin. It's not a problem for him. It's his life for many years already, for decades already. It's not a problem. He clearly doesn't care what will be the level of average income of Belarusians. He care about level of income of Amon, So that's I think that we definitely expect from the West way more from the solidarity side. And we think if you talk about personal sanctions, there should be sanctions against first businessmen around Lukashenko. That could be filled by him. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think you made a lot of really good points there. There is an effort right now to look at personal sanctions with the new executive order that would come from the White House and target the money bags. So I agree with you. I think you're right, though, that the last 7 or 8 months have shattered a lot of illusions. There's no magic number. It doesn't matter how many people you put on the street if there's not enough splits in the security services. And at this point, not enough people have left the security services. So until you can encourage people and provide more opportunities for people to leave safely, that's something that I would worry about. Ryhor has written a really interesting article that I think is really brilliant. And he says that Lukashenko has stayed in power because he did three things. He kept the ruling class united. So that's Oman and all the security guys. So that's number one. Number two is the democratic movement failed to bring everyone together who doesn't like Lukashenko. He did some opinion research, and he found that 45% of people in urban areas are tired of Lukashenko, but they're apathetic, and they wouldn't necessarily support the democratic movement. And then on point three, he says this is your point, Andre, he says the international community is afraid of the bear, and that we've been too status quo and we haven't done enough. So until the international community or Russia does something, the situation's not going to change. And I think that's really good analysis.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I should say that actually I should introduce Andrei, that he is the co-chair of the Tell the Truth campaign, and he was presidential candidate last August. Okay, let's move to the question by Lesa Rudnik. What do you think the US can do to release political prisoners?
I think we have a big problem here. So there's not very many Belarusians whose names are known beyond Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and Maria Klesnikova. There's a huge number of names. So first, there needs to be a big campaign to increase public awareness of what's happening in Belarus and of better storytelling of these individuals. So I hope that PEN America and some of the foundations like that will embark on a big campaign. And I think it's a matter of getting President Biden and Tony Blinken to speak out forcefully, and every chance we get, bring up their names. Again, there's no magic bullet, but the more we talk about them, the better that they're known. And also to get celebrity journalists. If there's any celebrity journalists who will take this cause on, that can often help. In Ukraine, Oleg Sentsov was in jail. He was a big political prisoner. And PEN America did a great job making his name known. And that's a campaign that I would encourage everyone on this call to look at and maybe model.
Thanks. There is a question from Yulia. Could you please reflect on the role of EU to resolve the political crisis in Belarus? And what do you think about Sweden's chairing OSCE? And well, let's speak more generally about different institutions. What do you think are their roles, and whether it's realistic maybe to solve this crisis without the US?
I think it's impossible to solve this crisis without the US. The US has to be an actor in this. It's too, Belarus is too important geopolitically to try to resolve this without the US. I don't know enough about what the EU has done, frankly. I've looked at some of the assistance they've done, but I don't think that their negotiations have amounted to anything. Some of their sanctions have been good. Anders Oslin, our sanctions guy, says that the EU sanctions did target Belarusian officials who have summer homes in the Baltics, and that's something that they don't like. So I think that's something that that's a good thing. But so far, I don't know enough to say about the negotiation efforts.
Thanks. Okay, let's get back to the first question that we received. Do you think that personal sanctions really work?
So I work with guys who think sanctions are everything. I don't think sanctions are everything. I think that you can do more things beyond sanctions. Like I said before, the US needs to embark on a big media campaign and really support RFERL. We need to turn up our media assistance and really commit to Belarus. I think Andre is right, though, that no one wants to be sanctioned by the United States. It's not something that you want to have on your record. There's an argument, though, that it doesn't matter, that these people are never going to come to the United States, and they don't have assets here. So, why does it matter? I guess the counter to that is what other alternative do you have, right? It's something. It's at least a start. It shows where the United States is on the issue.
Okay, thanks. We actually received so many questions, so it's a little bit chaotic for me to choose some. But I think this is really good. Could you compare situation in Belarus to Venezuela?
Oh
Is
my
there a
God.
risk? Yeah, that situation in Belarus will develop in the same direction. That actually, I will can like add several words to this issue. That actually that we will receive the situation when we say that we do not recognize a person who runs the country, but he actually runs the country nevertheless. At the same time, we do not have that we have a situation when democratic movement leaders do not have um, legitimacy of the whole society, and basically you have a situation when it's very difficult to actually to find a common ground because actually no one recognizes anyone.
Yeah, I know that this is something that people at the State Department are thinking about, and they're very nervous about getting even close to that point. So it's tricky. Tikhanovskaya and her government or her cabinet are in Vilnius. The U.S. already went there. We went there first. That's a very loud symbolic move. Next, I think we'll probably go to Minsk. We will not present our credentials. I don't think we'll present our credentials in Minsk. The U.S. is trying to figure out what to do, but it's tricky how to play this out. When what does your polling say, Ryhor? That 37% of urban dwellers support the democratic movement. So that's not even a majority, right? It's a lot, but it's not a majority. I guess it depends on the polling. But I think the U.S. is going to be very hesitant, and it is aware of the Venezuela parallel.
Okay, let's move to the question. Um, what do you think are the mechanism of influence on Lukashenko that the US currently has, and do you think that US has a strategy that targets those in power directly?
I hope so. I don't know yet. I think it's being developed, honestly. And I think that the strategy will target the people around Lukashenko who have money and assets. And I hope it will target security services as well. What do you think, Ryhor? How would you do it if you were in charge of the policy?
Well, it's it's tricky. Mm, I think that at the same time, I think that what we should know that actually the scheme that Lukashenko's family use to take money is pretty simple. That actually Belarusian oil refineries sell the oil products to the firm which is controlled by Lukashenko's family, and then this firm sell these oil products to the West or to Ukraine or somewhere else. So in a way, it's pretty simple that it's very important to actually to try to target the firms that are working in the oil sphere. If we speak about sanctions, I think that's like the most important issue, and to sanction people who are actually around Lukashenko and who are called pockets of the regime. I'm not sure that's like the right title of these people, but you can call them oligarchs or people who are like laundering money for Lukashenko. But anyway, there are a few people who are around him and who are important for his business interests. And I think that it's very important to influence them. And that's pretty it. And at the same time, I think that it's important to remember that actually things for them are not good as well. It's very bad situation for everyone right now in the country, because Lukashenko cannot suppress everyone, but at the same time protests cannot suppress him, win over him. So it's very tricky, and I think that actually if the US use this mechanism that it has, maybe it will have more influence. And at the same time, many people are actually waiting for this report that should be published, I guess, by the US Congress about the money of Lukashenko, because it was adopted in this
The Belarus Democracy Act. Yes.
Yeah, it was written that actually the US Congress should publish it, I guess, next month. So many people are just waiting what we will see.
And that's something that we definitely encourage. I mean, your recommendation is spot on. Go where the money is.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then let's move to the question from Facebook. It's a tricky one.
Uh-oh.
No, not so tricky. Okay. What are the chances that actually Belarusian law enforcement bodies that actually carry out repressions will be recognized as terrorist organizations? I will provide some context to you that actually Svetlana Tikhanovskaya team, they are trying to push the Western countries to recognize OMON or several such units as terrorist organizations.
It isn't going to happen. I don't see that happening at all. I mean, one of the Oman units was included in sanctions, I think, in December. Is that right? Yeah. I can go back and look at the report. Sorry, on December 23rd, the United States added the Minsk Oman unit and Minsk, the KGB Alpha and Minsk JUVD or GUVD. That's not going to happen. It's not going to be recognized as a terrorist organization. That's just not. It's a creative idea, but it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Okay, let's move to the question from Zoom that I guess we missed. Well, that's the question that actually Lukashenko is a person who was a dictator for a long time. It didn't happen last year. And at the same time, Western countries were investing in Belarus and having, I cannot say good relations, but they were pragmatic relations with Lukashenko. So the question that we received is that actually, why actually the economic cooperation continues, despite the fact that actually many Western countries raise their concerns over human rights abuses in Belarus?
It's a good point. I don't know the specifics on how much money is flowing back and forth between the U.S. and Belarus, but it's a good point. There's always going to be some inconsistency between our ideals and what we actually do. Can I ask you or the audience? I have a question. Is beyond money, what does Lukashenko care about? This is something that we're really interested in Washington. Does he care about international prestige? Does he care about being the bad boy of being in the out club? Like what are other things that could be used against him?
Well, that's a very tricky question. Does anyone would like to answer this? Not just me, because we have so many great experts here. So
loyalty. Yeah, Alessia says loyalty of the elites.
Yeah. Well, frankly speaking, you just asked a very difficult question, and I'm just not sure that I can answer it quickly and sharply, but I think that actually maybe the right answer is no. He is in love with his power, and he doesn't care much about the rest. And even if we speak about money, I'm not sure that actually money is important, but it's not the issue that decide everything. If you, for example, compare Lukashenko with Yanukovych, it's pretty clear that Lukashenko cares about money much less. And I think that actually for him, maybe he still has this feeling of heritage. I'm not sure about it, but maybe it's important for him to save something for history because, well, he was president for 26 years.
Yep.
And maybe he wants to have something written in history. So I think it's maybe that's maybe the most important thing. He thinks about heritage, and I think what's important to understand when we speak about Belarus, that actually that political transit it was started in a way, and it's already happening, and right now it's always a huge question for him actually to how to conduct this transit. And so maybe for him it's important actually to have a proper transit of power. And I think maybe it's one thing that the West can use in relations with him, that actually to help him in a way to conduct this transit of power in a more stable way, because they also understand that, well, they have a bad situation because like the majority of society is against them, and they are supposed to find some kind of solution, to live in the long term with that. You cannot live within society that actually hates the regime. So I think that actually maybe it's important for him and for his team actually to have this solution, to have a more stable transit of power. Maybe I'm naive. I'm not sure, but anyway, that's the answer. And also, I see in our chat box that actually many people say that international prestige is important for him, and well, yeah, probably that's true.
Yulia says prison. She says,
Yeah.
and that's a consistent theme in the post-Soviet regimes too. If they're not in power, they go to jail.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. But in a way, there were a few transits among post-Soviet countries. Well, not post-Soviet, like post-socialist countries, like 30 years ago, and many of them had pretty stable transit of power when actual dictators or communist like officials, they basically stayed in power, just like became a little bit more democratic, and allowed other democratic parties to participate in elections. So maybe it's a way ahead. Okay, let's get back to questions. I will just open. Mhm. Just 1 second. I'm looking. Mhm. Yeah. Well, it seems.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. I was just going to say, I forgot to mention one other point. One of your panelists asked about the EU. I think it's important to mention that what the US does, the EU generally will follow. So the US just put sanctions on 43 more officials, and the EU is talking about doing more as well. So, even if we don't sanction enough or the right people, it may provoke more action from the EU.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so we have the last question actually. So, and well, it's almost 8 o'clock in Minsk, and the question is, well, it's off topic, but okay. What the single best piece of advice you ever received?
Oh my goodness.
Well, yeah, that's the last question we received. So sorry, yeah, but
no, it's a fun one. It's a fun one. It's Friday night. Come on. Okay, so the best piece of advice I ever received applies to Minsk. Hold on. When things suck, hold on. When things are good, hold on. I can't give you all any better advice than that. Just be persistent in the face of adversity, in the face of good and bad. So thank you all for the opportunity to be with you. It's really a pleasure. I would love to stay in touch. I'll write my email address down below. And if you have more ideas of things that we should be floating to policymakers, to Congress people, and to the US government, please just drop me a line, and I'd love to hear from you all. We put out short publications on Belarus, and we do some events. They're in English, but you all are most welcome to join us. And we're the think tank in Washington that's making the most noise on Belarus and trying to keep people focused on helping the democratic movement. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's really a pleasure. And I hope to see you in Minsk when the country is, when you know who is finally gone. I'm not going back until that happens.
Yeah. Right. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. That was really great. And thanks a lot for your work and for joining us today. And thank all of participants for taking part in this discussion. I would like to remind that actually this meeting was a part of our Shape conference and organized by the Center for New Ideas. Please bookmark our website. Please follow our social media, social network pages to receive first-hand announcements of our events, and let's stay in touch. And thanks everyone, and have a nice week.